I'm an entrepreneur. I'm interested in exploring how social institutions that fundamentally define how we live are conclusively underpinned by elements of our cognitive psychology, the innate characteristics that are predictably distributed across the spectrum of humans in a way that you can fairly deterministically count on certain trends about the way people will react to things or what they will pay attention to and so on. In great part, I'm more interested in those things than I am in the tools that have been necessary for me to sponsor my curiosity about those things and my research into those things. I've looked at my commercial activities as effectively a means to fund those probabilities.
I was going to say, you've always been consistent in your views and beliefs in that area right from the beginning.
Yes, I'm fairly dogged. It's more compulsive and obsessive. I am very determined to understand important things about the transactional dynamics of institutions and humans in important aspects of social life, particularly how justice is dispensed and whether or not the system is fair, whether it can be predictably manipulated. I have a scientific background. I've not taken a conventional path to exploring the areas that interest me, even though they're fairly technical. They certainly benefit from affiliation with academic institutions. What I've wanted to do, it looks at the practical end of the tendencies that are explored academically. Firstly, did not think that I would have the control that I needed if I pursued those things academically. Secondly, I've always been very restless and patient in terms of satisfying my thirst for knowledge and progressing at my own pace. What I've been really interested in is exploring how access to courts and access to justice, in effect, can be democratized and can be rid of some of the impediments which are completely unnecessary in this day and age, which effectively ensure that a large proportion of people will never get justice. I've said this and repeated, the best way of getting a just outcome, or the most reliable way as a matter of probability, is to insert electrodes in people's brains to extract information and then put it through a system that applies the law algorithmically. You laugh, but the fact is that the amount of inconvenience and cost people go through in the court system, they lose everything along the lines. The actual risk, or statistically the overall loss associated with that process, would be negligible. And there will be far more predictability, and it will get rid of lawyers entirely. We have the technology to do that now, but I think there's a psychological discomfort with it.
I think it's important for you to stress that you actually do hold the law in high regard in respect of, I know that you have a number of issues with it, but in itself, you have respect for the law.
I don't have any issues with the law.
No, people perceive you as being someone that is anti-law or against the system.
Okay, I didn't know that. It depends on which tabloid you read.
Oh, I've seen you. I know what you think.
People like me cannot live without the law. I am fundamentally very difficult. I'm very opinionated. Most of my life is about offending one mob or the other. I rely on the law to basically function. That's how I've always been. Even when I criticize people that have important positions in the legal system, I do it in the confidence that the law will protect me because I'm not doing anything wrong. My confidence in that transcends my belief or faith in the goodness of people or the competence of them, especially. I think it's important to understand also that my understanding of the law or appreciation for it is largely academic rather than practical, in the sense that I'm not a lawyer, as a lot of people like to repeatedly point out, not one by choice, because I do not like the way the profession effectively commoditizes matters of philosophy and logic. And I think that's what the law is about. It's about the right argument winning. It's about the passion with which people advocate for things. I'm not really advocating for people. I cannot serve any particular person's interests. I'm very independent, and I believe in causes. I support people in pursuing those causes. But I can never, for instance, help someone make a deal so they get personal benefit out of concealing the truth about something that is in the public interest. All of those things mean that I'm compatible with the way a lot of matters of right and wrong are monetized, the profession. I think ultimately that is the argument for machines taking over. The absurdity of the Civil Procedure Act, or the civil procedure legislation globally, started off with the problem of large institutions and resourceful institutions effectively denying people justice by perpetually raising procedural technicalities to deprive people of a quick, when I say quick, I don't mean approximate, but
sounds like someone we've been dealing with recently.
But an unimpeded access to the court so they can have their matters determined, so people don't abuse the possibility of getting adjournments and so on. Ironically, people have started exploiting that now. The same people that this was supposed to stop have now started using it to effectively say that it is too cumbersome or too time-consuming for certain matters to be resolved by the court in a way that is reliable. It's a very predictable chain of reasoning, which ultimately culminates in using what I was talking about, because if you start prioritizing expedition to the point that some people are being driven out of the courts to get their issues ventilated, and especially when the government does it, which is the case with the Victorian Legal Services Board, you see a lot of lawyers that we talk to basically talking about taking the law in their own hands and doing things that are completely antithetical to what they're supposed to stand for. But I don't think that they're necessarily against the concept of the court system the way it exists conceptually. They just don't have any faith in the physical manifestation of it in the form of the courts that have basically refused to hear their claims with an open mind. I think it's a predictable chain of events where you completely lose faith in human judges, or you lose faith in the concept of the justice system as it currently is. Even though people will become more comfortable with the concept of machine judges at some point in time. And when I was talking about the application of software, I was fundamentally talking about the software applying the law as it is. But with time, even though people get more comfortable with it, I strongly believe that humans will always be involved in judging because they bring aspiration and they bring idealism. Not all of them. I think most of them are actually an impediment, but you have to give everybody a chance to get to the few people. 10 years ago, if we had started going in that direction, all the creative developments in the law, all the various equitable relief measures, judges and lawyers and litigants using creative ways of stretching the boundaries of the law to achieve a just outcome.
Mm.
Machines are not capable of doing that to that extent. It will always be useful to have humans, but I think most of the judges that abuse the civil procedure throwaway terms to inflict injustice on people and do it shamelessly, there's no argument to keep them going, because by their own definition, you could just replace them in a coin toss, because it's far more expedient. And I think at least there's a fair shot if the coin is not rigged in some senses. I talked about this a little bit because I think it contextualizes some of the themes that people will inevitably see in the current matters that we're involved in. Later stage, we'll talk about the specific skirmishes and battles that we've enjoyed. Not so sure about you with the Internal Legal Services Board and others. You obviously came into the dispute a little bit later.
That's right.
I have been the object of the Legal Services Board's infatuation for a little bit longer. My contentious relationship with them started because I had businesses that were involved in religious matters, and we were using a number of firms. I was very involved in the litigation. I didn't just let lawyers run the thing, because for me it was about developing a system and testing theories and using litigation in a way that was fundamentally integrated with the policies that I was developing to automate things. What I mean by that is I have very rigid policies, and I strongly believe in excluding human discretion from decision-making as much as possible. With the businesses that I ran, there were very strict rules about what would happen if certain events occurred. There was very little scope for concession or consideration of particular events or issues. In hindsight, I think it is predictable that those things need necessary consideration. But I hadn't thought about that at the time. That's how things had been set up, because they were successful in transacting. They scaled up pretty quickly. So at some point, we were spending $750,000 or so in 18 months or something like that on litigation. I wanted to optimize the use of litigation. I wanted to make sure that we could eliminate the inefficiencies and the unpredictabilities. Basically, the most important thing from my perspective was preventing people from cheating. You can't really have a contest according to the law if some people are breaking it or not playing by the rules. I witnessed a lot of lawyers basically acting contrary to what the conduct rules require them to do. I've had a very thorough academic exposure to the law, but not so much practical. At one point in time, I was interested in working in corporate law before I first started working in corporate finance at the university. I studied engineering, and that's particularly useful in areas like intellectual property law and technology-related issues and so on. I've always been passionate about the law, and I wanted to explore that a little bit. So I did some placements before finally pursuing the GDLP or deciding to do it. I really did not like the experience. I understood very early on that, especially if you're working at a large firm, you're basically going to be doing a lot of groundwork for several years, and I'm not capable of that, which is why I didn't go into research. The second thing is that you couldn't go by yourself and set up a firm that specializes in very technical areas, because it's not what people look for when they're looking for those things. I'm talking about this a little bit because I think it conceptualizes some of my views about the law. So the next thing I tried was criminal law. Very briefly, one of my friends at university basically recommended that I try that because there was a lot of administrative law involved in criminal law. So I did a brief internship, and what really shocked me, first of all, was that in the courtroom, prosecutors and the defense lawyers were addressing each other as my friend. And I thought this was unholy. It was so shocking to me. My only experience with the law was American drama, and I really wanted to give them some education about how they're supposed to treat each other. In all seriousness, I thought that it was fundamentally problematic because when people are friendly with each other, they're naturally affected by a need to maintain that relationship. That's why judges should not be offensive lawyers. What the prosecutors and defense lawyers have to do is, I'm not going to say that one side has a win in any process, but what really amazes me is that I can understand a situation where a person is guilty and is clearly guilty because they've shot someone in the middle of the busy street in the city. Now it's just a matter of whether or not they're getting procedural fairness. And in that sense, the defense lawyer is not trying to say it was actually Tom Cruise wearing his mask or something ridiculous like that, but he's just basically saying that maybe my client was not fully aware of his actions or was under the influence of something or whatever the legitimate argument may be. I can see how you don't need to be necessarily adversarial to some extent, but I don't think that in that instance there is necessarily a conflict of interest between what the prosecutor has to do and what the defense lawyer has to do, in principle and in practice, because they shouldn't want to unnecessarily throw the guy or give him more punishment than what is necessary to discourage that sort of behavior and also protect society. But that's different from a lot of situations where the police arrest someone, they realize that the person is probably not guilty, or they certainly cannot be sure that he's guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and they just want a conviction because it meets a quota or it ends the controversy, and they don't have to be worried about reassuring the public that the criminal is not loose anymore, whatever. And they're basically trying to make a criminal out of someone who they cannot reasonably argue this down. What they're accusing.
You have first-hand experience of that.
Yes, but it's because of my strong views that I have experience with that, actually. It's good that you introduced it, because I don't have to talk in the abstract, which is convenient. I became a pain in the ass of some public officials, and if they could only criminalize being pain in public officials' asses, they would have had an easier time getting me convicted. Unfortunately, they couldn't. So they accused me of a bunch of things, but mostly creating trouble for government officials in the sense of making them do their job in very demanding ways, getting provocative. I was prepared for a number of outcomes. It wasn't just reacting in the moment. My whole thing is then documenting corruption and basically privately developing conceptual frameworks, things that people do at university, but obviously not in a practical sense like the way I do it. I've been interested in studying corruption and how it progresses from a conceptual perspective, what things in humans make them vulnerable to engaging in corrupt conduct, and what checks and balances can be used to prevent that at a conceptual level and at a psychological level. Then hopefully those insights can be used to inform the way systems are designed to prevent that sort of behavior. I can accept that I make their life difficult by being who I am, by wanting to enforce standards which I think philosophically should be enforced, and other people may have a different prioritization of things. And that's fine. We can fight it out, and they can even try to do what they want to me. What I don't like is transparent duplicity and fraud. What I'm trying to say there is that the only thing that would come to my mind during the initial days where you have this case conferencing, there's this prosecutor, don't know his name. I think he just does the administrative side of things, and he basically tells me that they have a 80% of something conviction rate. I had done some research about what the rates were and how they were. They exploit the fact that people can't miss their shifts. People they charge are people that need to make money by the hour and every day to basically pay their bills. And then they tell them that, it's nothing, it's just a slap in the fucking wrist. And with a Ryan and Foren, he would be like, Mr. Goodsell, how are you today? I would say, okay, how are you? And he would be like, oh, very good. And I would say, it's because you don't know what I planned for you. One of my drivers, logistics business I had, this young driver, it was raining once and he basically had an accident, technically, where he barely touched the back of another car. He was riding a van.
Yes.
It was raining. And the people in the vehicle ahead of him, it was a family. The driver got very angry and he came out and was banging at the window. My driver was concerned that if he gets into an altercation, then he will be late for the delivery that he was making. And when he started getting abusive, the other driver, my driver, drove away. The police at my house within 15 minutes. So they tell me that the thing had been an accident and they wanted to speak with the driver immediately. I tell them that I'll get him to speak with the lawyer first this evening. They agree. What they charge him with is, first, his main offense was that he didn't stop at the accident. That's a legitimate thing.
Yeah.
And that we can have a contest about. But they also charged him with stopping at a no stopping place for the few minutes that he had stopped before reckless driving, which was the worst part, because that's a serious criminal offense and he can get jailed for that. He's an assumed reason. So they basically say either you accept the one thing that we would have had to actually fight and prove in court, or you basically fight a bunch of other things where if you get convicted, your visa gets cancelled and blah, blah, blah. And everybody is that it's fait accompli, he has to fucking accept it. The barrister that I'd had for him as well. I'm like, he was actually going to the fucking station. But I told him that he would go to the station the following morning, and that's why he didn't go to the station. The barrister didn't want to fucking argue that initially because he didn't think that would go anywhere.
We've had this discussion before where I've basically indicated to you that you go to court if it's more convenient, cost effective and expedient, plead guilty when potentially you're not.
Yeah, I don't get that.
Yeah, I know you don't, but that's effectively how the system works. Even obviously matters of the more minor offence, but that's what people will do. They will be faced with the decision to fight it or not. And if they don't fight it, then it's more usually cost effective. It doesn't cost them X amount for a lawyer to represent them. A matter that might go for 6 hours or 3 hours, whatever it may be.
It's a predatory system.
Yeah, I know.
No, but it's fundamentally offensive because it's institutionalized. It's no different than some time ago, people would be arrested for breaching contracts or not paying their debt on time. Then they could be used as, and there was a whole...
I'm not advocating it's right. I'm just saying that it's...
And I'm saying that it should offend everybody. My philosophy is this. People who are honest criminals, people who steal, break into people's homes and do that sort of stuff, horrible people, at least honest about it, when they get caught, they're not going to say that, I was making sure that you're okay. So people like that, they're always stressed and they take huge risks. There's no reason why public officials who are worse criminals, literally, by the fact that perversion of the course of justice is a greater offense than, let's say, minor breaking and entering. I'm not sure about the technical charges there. But anyway, the point is that I don't think government officials or government lawyers who are doing the wrong thing should be comfortable in court. And I do my best to make sure that happens. They're feeling just as fucking nervous and stressed as their honest counterparts do. And I use the law to do it. I feel like I'm auditing the system to tell them that if they continue doing this, at some point in time, they'll do it to the wrong person and then suffer. And also the other people will suffer vicariously by the way in which they're punished. So that's what I don't get about the whole friendliness. One side is accusing the other in most cases, knowing that they're just doing it as a fucking game. Forget about the fact that it's not even about me that they're doing it to me. It's the fact that they're doing it. I'm not offended by the fact that they're accusing me of doing something that I haven't done. I'm offended by the fact that they think that they can be people who are supposed to be ministers of justice, and then they can blatantly do something like that and think that they're entitled to respect or even courtesy. And it's not just about that either. It's about the fact that I think it presumes that I care enough about the things that scare people, about being labeled whatever they would label me otherwise, and about not making more enemies, that I would fundamentally be party to the fraud that they're committing on me and on the court, and just be courteous or even civil. I'm not going to break the law. It's lazy and stupid because it's unsustainable, and it doesn't really work. The only effective way of dealing with these people, that's what I'm doing. I'm developing techniques. This is a developing area. There's research being conducted all over the world about how to use creative ways to punish corruption. There's Johan Lansdorff, I think he's Danish, preeminent researcher in the field. He's produced this book called Institutional Economics of Corruption and Reform. He makes the argument that there's this concept of benevolent entrepreneurs. What that basically talks about is using technology and innovation in a way that empowers people to hold corrupt entities to account, using the free market tools to fight corruption. That's what I'm interested in, developing techniques that basically use the essential truths about human behavior to discourage corrupt conduct. And I think we've been pretty successful in that.
When I first met you and came on board, I think there were 6 police matters you've been charged with. I've seen the internal police email that we're going to do everything we can to get rid of him and get him kicked out of the country. I've seen it. Basically, of all those matters, in the end, all the charges were withdrawn after protracted.
Yeah. And the thing is, they were withdrawn despite my best efforts to keep the...
I think you're the only person to actually say, no, I want this matter heard in the county court.
No, I'm not, because I cited authorities. But it is rare, and that's what everybody says, even as in citing the authorities. The point is that maybe I'm just too academic about things. Like, my knowledge of the law, actually, I'm no longer academic. I just refuse to let experience corrupt me. You look at the court, the way it functions, and it's very different from the authorities that normally get quotes about how things function there. I understand that very well because that's what I've been researching for a long time. I've understood some practical aspects of it too, but it's not an inevitability like a lot of people say. It's not something that cannot be overcome. Sure. Within my time, I've done a lot in terms of achieving that. And when the dust settles, people will realize what things have been done and the precedents that it sets. I don't want to digress too much from what we want to talk about, so we'll discuss that on a different occasion. As I've discussed, I was interested in exploring the way corruption works, and what I had ultimately decided was to be very inflexible in dealing with government entities. I had developed a protocol where the idea was to create a system that effectively neutralized the ill effects of dealing with or of being forced to deal with corrupt public officials. The hypothesis that I developed, I had to test. So what we would do at the businesses that I owned was that if we identified a situation where the specific government department that we were dealing with was being unreasonably preemptive in terms of jumping to conclusions or something or the other, we would exercise our right in a way that was completely strict, and we wouldn't give them any concession, which would enrage them. We would do it in a predictable way after learning about how the system works and what they will need to do to get authorization of this and that. So the idea was to effectively provoke them in the sense that people in that situation would think that, how dare he? You do not know that we can do this to them or that. And then understanding what they will need to do things properly, then figuring out what they're likely to circumvent and skip because they're fundamentally doing the wrong thing. And then later on telling them that we had taught them. So that is what I was developing in terms of a mechanism to propose to people as a theory of neutralizing corrupt tendencies. Where the Victorian Legal Services Board, then it's an extension of the same thing. The law is full of paradoxes. I like to explain it as the profession having a noble heart but a wicked mind. All the principles that are developed by people that are idealistic or passionate about stuff, they said the theory of how things should be, then all of that gets perverted, distorted, and abused. Like the Civil Procedure Act, it starts off with a noble notion that people shouldn't be able to just delay and take things around the thing. And then there's a legal writer that I have particularly appreciated. His name is Grant Donaldson. He's a barrister in Western Australia. And he said in a book on declarations that, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he said that besides policy consideration, judicial discretion is perhaps one of the most abused terms because basically it's a catchphrase for judges who are too lazy or they have improper motivations. And what they cannot explain or justify, they say it's discretion. Humans know when dogs are happy, when they are hungry, and so on. We can't speak the language, but we read body language. And it's the same with the judges. Soon enough, there will be people arriving in court with spatial thermometers. They can check the temperature of judges. There'll be artificial intelligence aided tools. And you could, in the not so distant future, understand physical patterns of behavior, which correspond with spike in particular biometrics. You could, from that, ascertain in real time whether the judge was lying or not. And why should it not be like that? Because they are dealing with life and death. And the whole point of all of this is that they're supposed to be selfless and completely dedicated to what they're doing. So you should be able to physically monitor their vitals to come up with patterns of measurements, to understand their intention and know what they're having an infield thought while they're doing the thing. If they can't do that, then they should be replaced by machines, because the only humans that are worthy of that burden are people who are genuinely dedicated to doing the right thing. I never understand the whole concept of our judicial immunity is necessary for making sure that judges are not afraid, because firstly, they should be afraid of breaking the law. That's how humans function. Anybody who's not afraid will do the wrong thing. It's just genetics. It's not that a certain part of the species was specially designed to be a judge. Everybody is the same. If you are not scared of consequences, then you will abuse your discretion. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you can't sue judges, there is no accountability. Everything else is a farce, because the whole argument that the government can hold them to account and so on, all of that presumes that the government would want to do that and that people will have some agency over their government if they don't. But the fact is that, like, we have a judge, Justice Peter James Gordon, who's basically been caught engaging in ex parte, not technically ex parte, but because it was just before the proceedings started. But he complained privately to the Legal Services Board about me shaming him for not knowing the Evidence Act and some other things. I've developed this concept of shame basically being, in terms of evolution, a tool that makes people feel uncomfortable because what they're doing is they're prioritizing their immediate interest at the expense of something that will hurt them in the long run. For instance, destroy their standing in the community and so on. So then they feel embarrassed. Shame, that's an evolutionary mechanism to stop people from doing something that may seem good immediately, but ultimately is not in their best interest. Shame is a constant feature of what we're doing because I try to use it effectively in the context in which the academics were currently investigating corruption are developing tools like Johan Manshoff. He came up with the concept of the invisible boot of the market to basically come up with strategies to create conflicts of interest between different members of an enterprise to drive them to betray each other and so on. What I'm saying is that there's a part of shame that I personally experience in all of this, which comes from the fact that I enjoy this. There's a lot of risk and stress and so on, but biologically and the way I am, and I like competition, and I like being committed to something when life and death are involved. I like that aspect of it. And also I like the fact that I'm doing something important, and if I'm successful, it'll change things considerably. But my family, people like you, close to me, who supported me, the way you all have suffered that brings shame to me when I enjoy what I'm doing. I know that it's not something that anybody else appreciates like I do, and it's not something that you would have wanted. And also, I didn't think that it would get to this point.